Fucking jeez. I think I've probably already done this before, but I can't remember. Islamic-Jewish relations. Islamic-Jewish relations started in the 7th century CE with the origin and spread of Islam in the Arabian Peninsula. The two religions share similar values, guidelines and principles. Yes, I remember reading this. Islamic-Jewish relations started in the 7th century CE with the origin and the spread of Islam. Origin, what does that mean? History of Islam, Wikipedia. Redirected from early history of Islam. History of Islam. This article is about the history of Islam as a culture and polity. Can I dare ask what polity means? For a history of the Islamic faith, see Islamic schools and branches. The history of Islam concerns the political, social, economic and cultural developments of Islamic civilization. Most historians accept that Islam originated in Makkah and Medina at the start of the 7th century CE. Muslims regard Islam as returned to the original faith of the prophets, such as Jesus, Solomon, David, Moses, Abraham, Noah and Adam, with a submission Islam to the will of God. According to tradition, in 610 CE, the Islamic prophet Muhammad began receiving what Muslims consider to be divine relations, calling for submission to the one God, the expectation of the imminent last judgment, and caring for the poor and needy. Muhammad's message won over a handful of followers and was met with increasing opposition from Meccan notables. In 622, a few years after losing protection with the death of his influential uncle Abu Talib, Muhammad migrated to the city of Yathrib, now known as Medina. With Muhammad's death in 632, disagreement broke out over who would succeed him as a leader of the Muslim community during the Rashidun Caliphate. By the 8th century, the Umayyad Caliphate extended from Iberia in the west to the Indus River in the east. Polities such as those ruled by the Umayyads and Abbasid Caliphate in the Middle East and later in Spain and southern Italy, Fatimids, Seljuks, Ayyubids and Mamluks were among the most influential powers in the world. Highly Persianized empires built by the Samanids, Hanavids, Hurrids made significant developments. The Islamic Golden Age gave rise to many centres of culture and science and produced notable polymaths, astronomers, mathematicians, physicians and philosophers during the Middle Ages. By the early 13th century, the Delhi Sultanate conquered the northern Indian subcontinent, while Turkic dynasties like the Sultanate of Rum and Artukids conquered much of Anatolia from the Byzantine Empire throughout the 11th and 12th centuries. In the 13th and 14th centuries, this is boring and dumb. The oil boom stabilized the Arab states of the Persian Gulf, making them the world's largest oil producers and exporters, which focus on free trade and tourism. During the 19th and early 20th centuries, most of the Islamic world fell under the influence or direct control of European great powers. Surely it would be the European great powers. During the 19th and early 20th centuries, most of the Islamic world fell under the influence or direct control of the European great powers. Surely. Their efforts to win independence and build modern nation-states over the course of the last 2 centuries continue to reverberate to the present day, as well as fuel conflict zones in regions such as Palestine, Kashmir, Xinjiang, Chechnya, Central Africa, Bosnia and Myanmar. The oil boom stabilised the Arab states of the Persian Gulf, making them the world's largest oil producers and exporters, which focus on free trade and tourism. Timeline. Main article, Timeline of Islamic History. The following timeline can serve as a rough visual guide to the most important polities in the Islamic world prior to the First World War. I'm going to look into this word polity, and it's an irregular plural. Polity, find on this page. Fucking Christ. Find on this page. Find in page polity. Polity, where's polity? I love you. Polity. Polity, this article is about the history of Islam as a culture and polity. There we go, polity. Polity, where are you? I love you, polity. Where are you, polity? Oh no. Polity, early sources and historiography. Well, that'll be bloody interesting in itself. Early sources and historiography. Main articles, historiography of early Islam. The study of the earliest periods in Islamic history is made difficult by a lack of sources. For example, the most important historiographical source for the origins of Islam is the work of al-Tabari. While al-Tabari is considered an excellent historian by the standards of his time and place, he made liberal use of mythical, legendary, stereotyped, distorted, and polemical presentations of subject matter, which are however considered to be Islamically acceptable, and his descriptions of the beginning of Islam post-date the events by several generations, al-Tabari having died in 923. Differing views about how to deal with the available sources has led to the development of 4 different approaches to the early history of Islam. Differing views about how to deal with the available sources has led to the development of 4 different approaches to the history of early Islam. All 4 methods have some level of support today. The descriptive method uses the outlines of Islamic traditions while being adjusted for the stories of miracles and faith-centered claims within those sources. Edward Gibbon and Gustav Weil represent some of the first historians following the descriptive method. On the source critical method, a comparison of all the sources is sought in order to identify which informants to the source are weak and thereby distinguish spurious material. The work of William Montgomery Watt and that of Wilfred Madelung are 2 source critical examples. The work of William Montgomery Watt and that of Wilfred Madelung are 2 source critical examples. On the traditional critical method, the sources are believed to be based on oral traditions with unclear origins and transmission history and are so treated very cautiously. Inyas Goldziher was the pioneer of the traditional critical method, and Yuri Rubin gives a contemporary example. The skeptical method doubts nearly all of the material in the traditional sources regarding any possible historical core as too difficult to decipher from distorted and fabricated material. An early example of the skeptical method was the work of John Wansbrough. Nowadays, the popularity of the different methods employed varies on the scope of the works under consideration. For overview treatments of the history of early Islam, the descriptive approach is more popular. For scholars who look at the beginnings of Islam in depth, the source critical and traditional critical methods are more often followed. After the 8th century, the quality of sources improves. Those sources which treated earlier times with a large temporal and cultural gap now begin to give accounts which are more contemporaneous. The quality of genre of available historical accounts improves, and new documentary sources such as official documents, correspondence and poetry appear. For the time prior to the beginning of Islam in the 6th century, sources are superior as well, if still of mixed quality. In particular, the sources covering the Sasanian realm of influence in the 6th century are poor, while the sources for Byzantine areas at the time are of a respectable quality and complemented by Syriac Christian sources for Syria and Iraq. Islamic origins. Main articles: Pre-Islamic Arabia, religion is in pre-Islamic Arabia, Muhammad and Quran. See also early social changes under Islam. Arabia united under Muhammad. Islam arose in the context of late antiquity. The second half of the 6th century saw political disorder in Arabia, and communication routes were no longer secure. Religious divisions played an important role in the crisis. Judaism became the dominant religion of the Himyarite kingdom in Yemen after about 380, while Christianity took root in the Persian Gulf. There was also a yearning for a more spiritual form of religion, and the choice of religion increasingly became an individual rather than a collective issue. While some were reluctant to convert to a foreign faith, those faiths provided the principal intellectual and spiritual reference points, and Jewish and Christian loanwords from Aramaic began to replace the old pagan vocabulary of Arabic throughout the peninsula. Hanif seekers searched for a new religious outlook to replace polytheism, focusing on all the encompassing Father God, Allah, whom they freely equated with the Jewish Yahweh and the Christian Jehovah. In their view, Makkah was originally dedicated to this one true religion established by Abraham. According to tradition, the Islamic prophet Muhammad was born in Makkah around the year 570. His family belonged to the Quraysh, which was the chief tribe of Makkah and a dominant force in western Arabia. To counter the effects of anarchy, they upheld the institution of a sacred months when all violence was forbidden and travel was safe. The polytheistic Kaaba shrine in Makkah and the surrounding area was a popular pilgrimage destination which had significant economic consequences for the city. Most likely, Muhammad was intimately aware of Jewish belief and practices and acquainted with the Hanif. Like the Hanif, Muhammad practiced tahanuth, spending time in seclusion at Mount Hira and turning away from paganism. When he was about 40 years old, he began receiving at Mount Hira what Muslims regard as divine relations delivered through the angel Gabriel, which would later form the Quran. These inspirations urged him to proclaim a strict monotheistic faith as the final expression of the prophetic tradition earlier codified in Judaism and Christianity, to warn his compatriots of the impending judgment day and to castigate social injustices of his city. Muhammad's message won over a handful of faithful, but was met with increasing opposition from notables of Mecca. In 622, a few years after losing protection with the death of his influential uncle Abu Talib, I think I've read that and I'm bored now, Shined Caliphate, blah blah blah, all that shit. Crusades, main article, Crusades. Saladin and Guy of Lusignan after the Battle of Hattin. List of Crusades, early period: First Crusade, 1095 to 1099, Second Crusade, 1147 to 1149, Third Crusade, 1187 to 1192, Low period: Fourth Crusade, 1202 to 1204, Fifth Crusade, 1217 to 1221, Sixth Crusade, 1228 to 1229, Late period: Seventh Crusade, 1248 to 1254, Eighth Crusade, 1270, Ninth Crusade, 1271 to 1272. Beginning in the 8th century, the Iberian Christian kingdoms had begun the Reconquista aimed at retaking Al-Andalus from the Moors. In 1095, Pope Urban II, inspired by the conquest in Spain by Christian forces and implored by the Eastern Roman Emperor to help defend Christianity in the East, called for the First Crusade from Western Europe, which captured Edessa, Antioch, the county of Tripoli and Jerusalem. In the early period of the Crusades, the Christian kingdom of Jerusalem emerged and for a time controlled Jerusalem. The kingdom of Jerusalem and other smaller Crusader kingdoms over the next 90 years formed part of the complicated politics of the Levant, but did not threaten the Islamic Caliphate nor other powers in the region. After Shirkuh ended Fatimid rule in 1169, uniting it with Syria, the Crusader kingdoms were faced with a threat, and his nephew Saladin reconquered most of the area in 1187, leaving the Crusaders holding a few ports. In the Third Crusade, armies from Europe failed to recapture Jerusalem, though Crusader states lingered for several decades, and other crusades followed. The Christian Reconquista continued in Al-Andalus and was eventually completed with the fall of Granada in 1492. Following the low period of the Crusades, the Fourth Crusade was diverted from the Levant and instead took Constantinople, leaving the Eastern Roman Empire, now the Byzantine Empire, further weakened in their long struggle against the Turkish peoples to the east. However, the Crusaders did manage to damage Islamic caliphates, according to William Malmesbury, preventing them from further expansion into Christendom and being targets of the Mamluks and the Mongols. See also High Middle Ages, Francocratia and Crusader states. Ayyubid dynasty, main article, Ayyubid dynasty, Ayyubid dynasty. Ayyubid Empire. Ayyubid dynasty was founded by Saladin and centered in Egypt. In 1174, Saladin proclaimed himself Sultan and conquered the Near East region. The Ayyubids ruled much of the Middle East during the 12th and 13th centuries, controlling Egypt, Syria, northern Mesopotamia, Hejaz, Yemen, and the North African coast up to the borders of modern-day Tunisia. After Saladin, his sons contested control over the Sultanate, but Saladin's brother Al-Adin eventually established himself in 1200. I'm bored and this is dumb. It's dumb and I don't like it. Nah. What does it say about the early modern period? Main article, Early Modern History. In the 15th and 16th centuries, three major Muslim empires formed: the Ottoman Empire in the Middle East, the Balkans and North Africa, the Safavid Empire in Greater Iran, and the Mongol Empire in South Asia. Really? The Mughal Empire. I know that. But wasn't it mainly India? Come on, you big poo. What's that? No. The Mughal Empire is conventionally said to have been founded in 1526 by Babur, a warrior chieftain from what today is Uzbekistan, who employed aid from the neighbouring Safavid and Ottoman empires to defeat the Sultan of Delhi, Ibrahim Lodi, in the First Battle of Panipat, and to sweep down the plains of Upper India. The Mughal imperial structure, however, is sometimes dated to 1600, to the rule of Babur's grandson Akbar. This imperial structure lasted until 1720, until shortly after the death of the last major emperor, Aurangzeb, during whose reign the empire also achieved its maximum geographical extent. Reduced subsequently, especially during the East India Company rule in India, to the region in and around Old Delhi, the empire was formally dissolved by the British Raj after the Indian Rebellion of 1857. Although the Mughal Empire was created and sustained by military warfare, it did not vigorously suppress the cultures and peoples it came to rule, but balanced them by establishing new administrative practices and incorporating diverse ruling elites, leading to more efficient, centralised, standardised rule. The base of the empire's collective wealth was agricultural taxes instituted by the third Mughal emperor Akbar. These taxes, which amounted to well over half the output of a peasant cultivator, were paid in the well-regulated silver currency and caused peasants and artisans to enter larger markets. What a load of shit.